everyone. Welcome to Wealth Redefined. I'm your host, Michael Reynolds, independent financial advisor and owner of Elevation Financial. Thanks for joining me today. I'm going to talk a little bit today about moving past money issues that you may have been avoiding. When I say you, I mean all of us. I'm not just pointing at you in particular. I'm pointing at all of us because we all kind of have this issue sometimes. We all struggle with moving past money issues or the challenges that come up when relating with money, when dealing with our mindset around money. So today I'm going to talk about the mindset around money and kind of moving past some of these struggles and these issues. It's a good time of year to do this, in my opinion, is the work I've been doing with clients is always uncovering these types of issues. And especially near the end of the year, it's a reflective time. The holidays are coming up. It's end of year stuff. We kind of look back on how the year has gone. It's one of those time of year things we think about. How have we dealt with money? Or do we have money challenges? Do we have mental baggage around money and how we deal with money? Do we have obstacles we're trying to overcome? So that's what I'm going to talk a little bit about today. I don't claim to have all the answers, but I do want to share some thoughts around moving past money issues that we tend to avoid, things that we kind of put off and hide from. So I'm going to start with just talking about the why behind why we avoid dealing with money issues. And some examples of this. What are some examples of money issues we sometimes avoid dealing with? Budgeting. Budgeting is always front and center. Whenever I talk to someone about budgeting, it seems like it's one of those things that is just difficult for people to kind of wrap their minds around and to get excited about. Budgeting seems like it feels like punishment to a lot of people. It's one of those things that just feels like it's abuse or it's punishment to have to do a budget, to have to plan around watching where our money's going. And so budgeting is not fun for most people. They don't get excited about it. They have all sorts of mental baggage around it. One of the reasons it's so tough is it gives you glaring visibility into how we spend money. And that's one of those things that it's tough for some people. It's tough to kind of get glaring visibility into how you're spending your money. So it's very difficult for many people to get excited around budgeting or to kind of overcome this avoidance around budgeting. Also, saving for financial independence. Most people call it retirement. I hate the word retirement, so I say financial independence. So when it comes to saving for retirement or financial independence, that's one of those things that we tend to avoid. A lot of people just avoid even thinking about it. We avoid talking about it, thinking about it, doing anything about it. And we have a lot of head trash about it. And one of those things that we get hung up on is the head trash around not being further along. It's very easy to avoid wanting to talk about or think about retirement planning or long-term planning when we feel like we have all this guilt around not being further along. So that leads to paralysis and leads to avoidance. It can also feel insurmountable. Being able to plan for 20 years down the road or what's happening later in life, it can be very difficult to kind of envision what that looks like. It feels insurmountable to even get there. It also feels overwhelming at the same time. Again, it's hard for us to plan sometimes what we're having for dinner tomorrow night. How are we supposed to plan something 20 years in advance and predict all the things that are supposed to happen to get us there? So future goal planning can feel very overwhelming and often insurmountable. And I read this recently in a book that I'm working on now called The One-Page Financial Plan by Carl Richards. And he had really good insights into why we struggle so much with things like budgeting, with things like looking at our finances, with things like analyzing where we are from a financial standpoint. And he pointed out that often when we are looking at our finances, it's a really easy way to uncover all of the financial mistakes we've made in the past. When we look at our budgeting, when we look at where we are with savings, when we look at where we are with financial planning and investing, it has a way of uncovering all these financial mistakes we've made in the past. And what happens when we do that? We have all this guilt. We bring up all this guilt from our past about, hey, I didn't save enough, or I spent too much money, or I went into debt for this or that. And we come at it with all this emotional baggage. And that can cause us to freeze up, to have paralysis, and to not do anything about it. So there are lots of reasons why people tend to kind of freeze up and avoid tackling financial issues and financial challenges, whether it's debt, whether it's budgeting, whether it's cash flow management, whether it's saving, whether it's career stuff, all this stuff. It's very difficult for people to kind of take it head on or to approach those challenges head on, because it brings up all this mental baggage we have. And again, a lot of it's around uncovering mistakes we've made in the past that we don't want to deal with or think about. So that's kind of the why behind why a lot of people struggle with money challenges, myself and all of us included. This is not any one person in particular. It's very common for many people. And that brings me to my next point, which is you're not alone. How do we overcome these money avoidance issues, and what can we do about it? So one thing I want you to remember, you're not alone. When it comes to money challenges and money issues, it's very common for people to have these feelings around money. 8 out of 10 people live paycheck to paycheck. This is not a great statistic, but it's also a reminder that you are not in the minority. You're in the majority if you're struggling with money challenges, and not money challenges logistically, but money challenges around approaching dealing with these issues, dealing with debt issues, with cash flow issues, with saving issues. It's the act of dealing with them that we avoid. And so again, you're not alone. Many people struggle with this. Also, another point, financial literacy is virtually non-existent, or I should say education around financial literacy is virtually non-existent in the US. When was that? I mean, do you remember having a class on managing money when you were in elementary school or high school, even college? It's basically non-existent. We were not taught this stuff. We were not taught things like compound interest, how it works, the different types of savings vehicles, budgeting best practices. We weren't taught this kind of stuff, how to approach and manage and understand different debt vehicles. We're not taught this stuff. And so it's understandable that so many of us in this country have such a toxic relationship sometimes with money, because we weren't taught this stuff. The financial literacy curriculum is basically non-existent. And so we've grown up without education around how to handle money and how to deal with money. And honestly, the financial industry doesn't help, because the financial industry makes things way too complex. The financial industry has this habit of overcomplicating so many things and making it seem so mysterious and difficult that when you combine the lack of financial education with the financial industry's love of complexity, it's a recipe for just walking away and avoiding dealing with financial issues altogether. So it's very understandable. So something else, most or many people at least, grew up where talking about money was taboo. I vividly remember kind of one anecdote from my childhood. I don't remember exactly how old I was. I think I was maybe 8, 9, 10, something in that range. And I was talking to my uncle one day, and my uncle seemed to me at that point very successful. He had a nice house. He had nice cars. He traveled a lot. He seemed to have this kind of wealthy lifestyle. And I kept asking him, not over and over at one time, but like in different points throughout our relationship, I would say, hey, how much money do you make? Because I was curious. I was like, hey, it looks like you're successful. It looks like you're doing well. How much money are you making to be able to afford this lifestyle? And his answer was always a chuckle. And he always said, not enough. He just never told me. He always said, I'm not making enough money. Chuckled, kind of made a joke about it, never told me. And that's only one example, but there are so many instances where I would ask, grown-ups at the time, like, hey, how much money do you make? Or what's a salary look like? Or how much do you make at this job? And nobody would tell me. And that's very common to many of us. We've grown up with this mindset that you're not supposed to talk about how much money you make, and talking about money is impolite, and it's just not done. And so we've grown up with this attitude of fear around talking about money. And so all this stuff swirls together to give us this complex about money challenges. So it's no wonder we're messed up about talking about money and dealing with money challenges head on. So anyway, I want to talk about some ways to kind of move past this, to think about how to work through some of these money challenges. And I'm bringing this up not just for kicks, but because it's so common in so many of the meetings I'm in with clients and so much of the work I do. Financial planning is not so much about math. It's not about, hey, the spreadsheets and the financial planning software and the projections, the investment performance, all that stuff is important, but all that stuff can be managed pretty well in a pretty straightforward way. The stuff that's messy and difficult is the mental and the emotional baggage around money. So I would say 20 or 30% of my time is spent on the logistics of, investing and setting up accounts and budgeting and helping people with planning. Like, that stuff is important, but the rest of the time is spent talking through goal setting, talking through setting objectives, talking through, okay, how are we going to tackle this challenge? How do you feel about this debt? What are you going to do to change this particular behavior going forward? How can I be a support mechanism and a coach to help you work through that? Often it's, when I'm working with a couple, they've never talked about this stuff. And so talking about money together, it's the first time they've ever talked about money together in a meeting with me. Where the three of us are together and I'm asking questions like, hey, what are your strengths and challenges and upcoming threats and opportunities and goals you have? And why is money important to you? And what's your reason for building wealth? When I ask those questions, couples often look at each other and then, start the conversation. Then later they say, wow, this has been phenomenal because we've never talked about this together before. And it took this meeting for us to really be honest with each other about how we feel and to really realize that, yeah, we want to work together on these challenges. So anyway, enough of that. That's the fluffy stuff. But the fluffy stuff is where the real work happens with financial planning. And so again, the first point I want to make here is you're not alone. You're not in the minority of people. You're in the majority of people if you are having challenges relating and moving past money avoidance issues. Something else I want to point out, something else that is important, I think, to think about as you work through things. You want to acknowledge privilege. Privilege is real. It's something that exists. And I think that I tend to resist extremes. I tend to resist the extreme that says, hey, you can't control your future. It's all about privilege and luck. And, the dice are kind of, rolled already. And that's the way it is. The other extreme is the bootstrap theory of, hey, I'm in charge of my own destiny and privilege doesn't exist and I'm in charge of everything and it's all about my actions. And I don't think either is correct. I think that your success is a mix of privilege and your actions together. Privilege is real, but your actions also are real. Your actions make a difference in how you achieve success. And the two of those together are what leads to success, not one or the other. Leslie's joining via Facebook Live. Thanks, Leslie. I appreciate you raising your hand. I'm not sure if you're raising your hand to agree with what I'm saying or if you're raising your hand to ask a question. Either way is totally fine. So if you have a follow-up comment, definitely pop that in. But thanks, Leslie, for saying hello on Facebook Live. Appreciate that. So again, I think it's a mixture. Privilege is real. Actions are real. Both make a difference, or both are the blend of how you achieve success. Next. This is big. One of my 3 words for 2020 was forgive. I think it's episode maybe 30 something, 32, 34 maybe. I talked about my 3 words exercise I do every year. I got this from Chris Brogan, who's a prominent business speaker and author. And he came up with this 3 words exercise. And I'll explain it a different time. I'm not going to take a whole bunch of time now, but it's basically a different way of setting goals for the year. It's 3 words that define your theme for the year. And one of my words was forgive. And this is big for me because I think forgiveness is an issue a lot of us struggle with. And so when it comes to forgiveness, one factor is it's hard for us to forgive ourselves for past money mistakes. And as kind of a side note to that, I think it's often difficult for people to forgive their partner if they're in a relationship as well for money mistakes as well. And I think it's super important for people to forgive themselves for money mistakes and to forgive their partner for money mistakes so you can move forward. So some ideas for forgiveness here. So one, focus on your emotions. If you're trying to forgive yourself for past money mistakes, I think it's really important to acknowledge your emotions. A lot of times we say, oh, well, I'm angry about this, or I feel guilt around this. And now I feel horrible for feeling guilt. And it's this cycle of destruction. So I'm a big fan of leaning into those emotions and acknowledging them and saying, hey, you know what? I feel like crap. I feel awful because I made this money mistake. And I feel terrible that I did this. Whether it's I went into debt for this thing, or I spent too much on this thing, or I waited 10 years to start my retirement savings, or whatever it is, or I bought this big thing that I feel regret now, whatever it is. You know what? We all make mistakes, but it's okay to feel bad about it. It's okay to feel guilty or bad about it. I think people that say, oh, you shouldn't feel guilty about stuff. Like I'm a big fan of saying, let's acknowledge the emotion. Let's look at it. Let's analyze it and say, you know what? It's part of me. Now that I give it a name and I acknowledge it, I can deal with it. So I really like that approach. Also, going with that, acknowledging your mistakes out loud, I think is very helpful. Often we keep things in our head so much and we just kind of let things fester in our heads and we never talk about it. So acknowledging those things out loud can be extremely helpful. Whether it's just to yourself saying out or writing it down and saying out loud, hey, I did this thing and it bugs me and I'm upset about it. And I'm acknowledging that emotion. Or maybe with accountability partners or in therapy or with group settings that you feel safe in, whatever it might be, acknowledging those emotions out loud can be extremely helpful. I think it's also good to think of each mistake as a learning experience. If you look at each particular mistake or challenge you've had in the past as a stepping stone, that is a way to kind of refine your knowledge and your development, that is extremely helpful as well. So kind of analyzing it objectively like that. Also, taking your own advice when you're trying to forgive yourself for past money mistakes. I think you should kind of shift things a little bit. Maybe take your own advice. If you're envisioning how you would give advice to someone else if they were you in that position, write that down and then come back to it 5 minutes later and look at it and say, okay, here's the advice I would give to someone else. This is now the advice for me. And that act of separating it a bit and making it a little more objective can be extremely helpful. Also, I found this, I forget where I saw it, but someone in one of the sources I was reading recently said, write yourself an apology. Write yourself an apology for the mistakes you've made in the past. If you're hung up on some issue or something you've done in the past with money, write down the apology. Say, you know what, I apologize. I'm sorry I did this thing, whatever. And then that can help you move past it because you've acknowledged it again. You've apologized for it. Like, that's all you can do. You've got to move on at that point. So those are some things that I've seen that can be really helpful in learning to forgive yourself. So Leslie added some more here via Facebook Live. Leslie said, I'm completely able to avoid making difficult money decisions in the midst of situation due to being privileged enough to have prepared for contingencies, but I never expected this. And she says, gestures around that all the world missed the coronavirus. So, so yeah, Leslie, that's great feedback. Thank you for acknowledging that the privilege and the actions have kind of mixed or blended in a way that allowed you to be prepared. So I appreciate you sharing that. And then Jennifer is popping in with a question as well. Do you have advice when two partners have different money baggage? That's a great question, Jennifer. That happens a lot. In fact, I'd say, most of the time, I think both partners in a relationship probably have different money baggage. Sometimes it's similar, but other times, or most of the time, they kind of approach things with different issues. I think these same things apply, but I think to me, the forgiveness of each other is hyper important in this case. I think if one partner has money baggage around, spending issues, or maybe spending is therapy for them, and they have baggage around something that affects the way they spend money, and the other partner has maybe saving baggage. Maybe they can't spend money because they're just so obsessed with saving, and and those are obviously in opposition. So being able to talk about those things out loud and to kind of unpack where the baggage came from and maybe go through these exercises together, I think can be a good start. Again, I'm not a therapist, so this is definitely getting into territory where a qualified, mental health therapist is better. But but those are some things I think are probably a really good start. Is working through these forgiveness exercises together could be useful. Also, next, I'm a big fan on focusing on one thing at a time. This goes back to the overwhelm. So one of the most common things I see is overwhelm. In fact, recently, this has come up a lot in recent conversations with new clients I've been working with. They come to meetings and they say, wow, one of our issues is we finally have clarity because we've never been able to even know where to start. How much do we save? Where do we put it in? Should we spend money on this? What should our budget categories be? How do I send my kids to college? I don't know what accounts to use or how much to save. And it all just feels so overwhelming. And not knowing where to start can just lead to paralysis, not doing anything. We just kind of give up and we go watch Netflix or go to work and do other things. And we just don't deal with this stuff. And so focusing on one simple thing at a time, I think for me is great advice that I've been following for a long time in life in general, but especially when it comes to money. So, some examples are, write down your spending for 30 days. Do nothing else. If you think budgeting sounds overwhelming, if you think saving sounds overwhelming, if you don't know where to start, just get a piece of paper out, write, 30 lines on a notepad. And, for the next 30 days, write down what you're spending your money on each day. I shouldn't say 30, that's more than one line is what you're gonna need, but maybe 30 pages in a notebook is what I should say. And write down what you're spending money on. Just write it down. Don't do anything. Don't change anything. Don't beat yourself up on anything. Just write down what you're spending your money on. And then after 30 days, just go back and look at it and say, okay, this is how I can start tracking my spending. And I'm getting a visual view of what I'm spending my money on. That can lead to more observations like, okay, what's important to me? Am I spending my money on the things that are truly important to me? If not, do I want to make a change? If so, great. Where else do I want to look? That can be a simple exercise that can give you a super simple, low maintenance starting point. Something else you can do, just practice saving a little bit extra each week into savings or investments. Don't worry about what you're saving it in, but make it a bank account. Make it Make it your Roth IRA, make it some other investment account that you haven't really managed in particular. Just do something. You can always make changes later, but start saving money every week and just see how it feels. Just say, okay, I'm going to put aside $50 a week from now on, or an extra $200 a month. And that's all I'm going to do. I'm just going to stick it in an account somewhere. If you have an investment account or a retirement account, maybe put it there. If you have a bank account, like a savings account that's somewhere else, put it there. Just start getting in the habit of saving a little bit each week or a little bit each month, and do that for a little while. Just do nothing else. Start to see how that feels. Taking that one simple step can kind of break through sometimes and say, you know what, I can take action. I'm not addressing this big, scary list of other stuff that I don't understand, but I can take this one simple action that is better than I was yesterday. Yesterday, I wasn't saving anything. Now I'm saving $100 a month. Okay, that's an action. I've taken action. And now I can analyze that and look to see where I want to go from there. An accountability partner. I'm sorry, I'm jumping ahead. My notes are pretty long today because I've got a bunch to talk about, but I'm jumping ahead. So I'm going to back up here and say one more exercise you can look at is your net worth statement. This doesn't really involve an action. It's more of an analysis. So get out a piece of paper, put a column or two columns, write a line down the middle of the paper, T at the top. On one side, put assets. On the other side, put liabilities. Put everything that you own on one side. Checking accounts, investment accounts, property, vehicles, everything. On the other side, put what you owe, put all debts there, anything that's a debt, and then do the math and get the difference. And that's your net worth. Very simple. Look at your net worth every day for a while, maybe a week or for the next month or so. Just look at it every day and don't do anything, but just look at it and start to get comfortable with it, because so much of the time, money challenges and avoidance issues are because we just have our head in the sand. We just don't look. So if you're forcing yourself to look every day at your net worth and look at what you own and look at what your debts are and what you owe and look at kind of the difference, it's going to start to desensitize you in a good way to your financial situation. And when I say in a good way, it's because you're not avoiding it anymore. You're just kind of sitting with it. You're getting comfortable with it. Every day you're pulling it out and saying, okay, this is my net worth. Whether it's positive or negative, you're looking at it and you're saying, okay, this is what it is. And eventually you're going to get to the point where it's like, it's not scary anymore because you've just been looking at it. And now you can start to decide, okay, do I want to make some changes? Do I want to improve this? Do I want to move in this different direction? That can be an exercise that can be helpful in getting comfortable sitting with your current situation as opposed to avoiding it. All right, now we're on to kind of the next section, which is setting up your environment for success. This is really, I'm a big fan of life hacks. It's kind of a, funny term, but life hacks are ways to kind of set up your environment to help you with challenges like this. So, the notes on the mirror, that can work really well. It's a big life hack people use a lot is, if your goal is to do X, Y, Z, maybe to save money or to work on something, put a note card on your mirror. It says, every day I'm focused on this thing. And that can be a simple life hack that just kind of reminds you. I'm a big fan also of digital systems. I really love using good digital systems. So I use Microsoft To Do as my to-do app. If you're a paper and pen person, use paper and pen, use notebooks, whatever it is, but capture the things you want to accomplish. So if you're focused on budgeting, one example might be every day have a to-do item that pops up that says, hey, go open up your budgeting app, categorize your transactions, analyze, where you want to change spending a little bit, and then close it out. Like every day, have it prompt you to open up your budgeting app and look at it and do something about it and just at least see where you are. Or maybe every week the to-do pops up and says, hey, every week, did you move that money into your savings account? Or better yet, set on auto recurring deposit so it just happens automatically for you. Leslie popped in with another comment. Leslie says, I was shocked when we actually did calculate and write down my net worth. My rough mental estimate was so far off. Thank you, Leslie, for sharing that. That's very common. We don't really have a great picture of where we are until we write it down. So that's really, really useful feedback for others as well, just to understand that when you write things down, you often get a much different picture than what you imagine in your head, which is a really awesome step toward making progress and getting more comfortable with your current financial situation. Thanks for sharing that, Leslie. Also, when you're setting your environment up for success, an accountability partner, I think is really, really helpful. So accountability partners can take many different forms. It can be a partner, a spouse. That can be good for some people. For others, it's maybe not as good. So maybe a best friend or someone that you're close to that can be a partner for you. In my case, my clients have access to a private community online called Wealth Workshop, and that's kind of meant to be an accountability group as well. So people can post, hey, I'm having struggles with this. I've got questions about this. I want to jump into a virtual, web conference office hours where me and some others can chat about stuff. It's meant to be an accountability group as well. So whether it's an online forum of people you trust, whether it's a mastermind group, whether it's a spouse or a friend, whoever it might be, a mentor, getting an accountability partner can be extremely helpful because once you unlock the challenges you're having and unlock the money issues that are kind of bugging you and allow someone else into your world, a lot of the stress kind of deflates a little bit. You don't have as much stress because you're not carrying the burden alone. So I think that can be really helpful. So wrapping up, one thing I also want to leave you with is to plan for failures. So often I struggled with this for so long, and there was always this attitude I've always heard of, failure is not an option, or don't even plan for failure. There's no plan B. And I think in some cases that can be useful. There are some contexts where, yeah, great, that makes sense. But for a lot of situations in our lives, I like to plan for failure. I like to say, you know what, like there is a high chance of failure here. So I'm going to start envisioning what that looks like. I'm going to, let's say I want to save up for, new home or whatever. I'm going to start this new business or whatever it might be. Starting a business is actually a really good example. I do this a lot. I start businesses a lot. I'm a serial or a parallel entrepreneur. I have I've been a business owner for 25 years, and I've sold businesses. I've started new ones recently. So that's something really comfortable for me. But for a lot of people, starting a business can be very scary. But if you go into it thinking, you know what, I'm going to plan for failure. I'm going to say, you know what, success is an option. Failure is also a viable option. In between is an option too. But let's say failure, like just flat out failure, is a viable option. What does that look like? Okay, what happens if I fail? What does it mean? Well, I've spent some money. I'll probably lose a little bit of money, hopefully not going into debt, but maybe I just lost the money I'm spending, not getting it back. I feel bad about it because I feel embarrassed I didn't succeed. Okay, fine. Okay, so what does that look like? Let's imagine how that feels. Let's imagine how it feels to fail at this thing you're doing. Or let's imagine how it feels to not buy that house next year and have to wait 3 or 4 years to do it. How does that feel? Okay, well, let's figure it out. If it feels awful and terrible, let's work through what we're going to do to address that feeling. And the funny thing is, once you start imagining those feelings and being kind of in that mind space, they don't feel quite as bad because you've kind of gone there mentally already. It's not an anticipation of something horrible happening. You've mentally kind of gone there already in a simulated format, and it kind of makes it easier to say, okay, I'm gonna decisively say that failure might be an option, and I'm going to do this anyway. And that can be very helpful for me anyway, to kind of plan for failures. And then when they happen, deconstruct them, learn from them. When you do have failures, deconstruct why they happened. And then finally, improve a little bit every day. This goes along with kind of the one thing at a time, but I'm a big fan of just tiny continuous improvements. If you struggle with budgeting, again, just track spending a little bit. Don't do a whole budget. Just start picking 1 or 2 categories and just kind of get good at those categories, and take a month or 2 and do that. And then move on to adding more depth to your budget. If you're struggling with saving, do a little bit every day, maybe increase it, over time, but don't try to bite off more than you can chew. Just do little improvements every day. Leslie popped in on Facebook Live again with a great question. She says, do you have any suggestions for technology between accountability partners outside your online community? Is there an app for that? That's a great question. I don't offhand. There's a ton of stuff out there, so I don't really have like one suggestion. But as far as technology between accountability partners, you could, one easy way, not easy way, but one, simple way that comes to mind is have regular meetings and just share screens on Zoom, pop up on your budgets together if you're doing budgeting, or maybe just have a quick Zoom meeting that says, hey, we're going to just talk about things we want to accomplish and hold each other accountable and keep it simple. There are also, depending on who the accountability partner is, if it's someone close to you, like a partner or a spouse, there are budgeting tools like Zeta that are built for partners sharing money stuff. I haven't used it personally, but I have heard of Zeta, I think it is, being one of those apps that people can share. So you might look at that as well. You could also do a Slack team. Slack is free for simple uses. So you could set up a Slack team and have you and your accountability partner could just be in that same Slack workspace and just send notes to each other on what your progress has been, or stuff to just kind of inspire each other. Slack is a really good tool for for simple collaboration between people like that. So I might look at Slack as an option as well. So that's a really good question, Leslie. Thank you. All right, so that is my those are my thoughts today on moving past the money issues that we sometimes avoid, whether it's budgeting, whether it's saving, whether it's tackling debt, whether it's hiding from debt, whether it's relating, with your spouse or partner when it comes to money. Those are kind of my thoughts on how to unpack that stuff and some ways to move past it. These are things that have all worked for me, and so I wanted to share those things for those who might be struggling with avoiding money challenges and how to tackle those things. So I want to thank those who joined the Facebook Live today. Jennifer and Leslie, I'll stick around after the music as well for any more questions, so stick around if you want to. But thank you everyone for joining me today. And I really appreciate you being a listener. As always, you know where to find me, but if you'd like to reach out, you can reach me at podcast@elevationfinancial.com. Or go to my website, which is elevationfinancial.com, and you can click that big friendly button on the homepage that says book a complimentary money session, and we can chat for about 45 minutes on whatever questions you have. With that, thanks so much for joining me today. Have a great day. We'll see you next time. All right, recording is off, music is down, still on Facebook and YouTube Live here. So big thank you to Leslie and Jennifer. Thank you both for being here today. I really appreciate it. If you have any of their thoughts, I'd love to hear them. I'll stick around for 20 more seconds or so, 30 seconds here as we wrap up. But I really appreciate the great questions. So Leslie had some awesome questions, and you too, Jennifer. Thank you so much for the questions and the comments and the feedback. I really love it when you guys join live. So, so it really means a lot. And Leslie says, thank you for answering my questions and tolerating me derailing you slightly. Not a derailing at all. I love it. I thrive on the chaos of live broadcasts. So I really appreciate that. So very, very much welcome. I appreciate you being here. All right. With that, we will go ahead and wrap up there. So again, thanks for joining today via the live broadcast. Really been a pleasure. And Blades, who is Mark, said he missed it. But that's okay. Mark, you can, the recording will be live here in about 2 minutes once I hit the stop button. So you can go back and listen to or watch the video here any minute now. So hang on there and you can see the recording here in just a moment. So thanks for popping at the last minute, Mark. Appreciate it. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day. See you next time.